Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Farm Woodland Forum webinar session on harvesting, processing and marketing your agroforestry. So this is actually is the end. This is the final session in a series of webinars that we've been doing to try and kind of walk people through the stages of planning, designing and delivering your kind of own agroforestry projects. Hence, we've got to harvesting, marketing and processing. So for those of you that are regular participants, you'll remember that last month I was down a forestry speaker for the session. I've more than made up for it, or we've more than made up for it as a collective. You're actually going to get to enjoy 4 speakers this evening. So we're going to start with Tom, who's from Warwickshire Walnuts, and he's going to come at this from more of a kind of trees producing a crop for you perspective. And then we've got Laura, Neil and Jez, who are all going to come at it from a forestry perspective, but a combination of looking at kind of managing farm woodlands and then also looking at what we can learn from harvesting from urban trees. If you have any questions as the speakers go, like feel free to drop them in the chat. But otherwise, we will get to a Q&A at the end of the session, although we will lose Jez at 8:30, I think. So you might not get to Q&A him, but I'm sure he'll be happy to pick them up afterwards. All right, I'm going to hand over to you, Tom. And just a reminder that if you could start by introducing yourself via your favourite tree and why it's your favourite tree, that would be great.
Right, am I on? No, you've gone mute. Am I on? Yeah.
You're on. I need to sort your presentation out.
Right, that's all right.
Yeah.
So, hello, I'm Tom Tame. Me and my brother farm in South Warwickshire. Small mixed farm. My brother now does most of the farming. I just help out with the walnut side. We've got about 14 acres of agroforestry now, all walnuts and a few other nuts as well. This is just going to be on the walnut side. We started planting the walnut orchard about 10 years ago, but we already have some existing very large seedling trees that my father had put in that were producing a ridiculous amount of walnuts. So for us, the walnut farming is going to be the way forward for us long term, because we're both a little bit older than we'd like to be to start it, but physically walnut's going to be what we concentrate on for the next 20 years, I think, as well as all the other farming we're doing. Okay, so because we're talking about harvesting today, one of the issues with walnuts is when you start planting your agroforestry, you need to know what you're going to plant, because you need to know your end market. For us, 95% of the crop we take is nuts in shell, dried nuts in shell, and they're sold locally. So we sell probably about 1.5 tons as dried walnuts in half-kilo bags to people passing trade. On a daily basis, we probably have 6 to 10 people come in. To get to that stage, we have to harvest. So if you want to click on Harriet. Okay, so for small agroforestry plantations, if you've got 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 trees, you're almost certainly going to be doing it with a nut roll. In this country, walnuts, the husk will split. Most of them will fall to the ground, but shaking the tree is a big advantage. If you go into a full tree shaker, you'll get a lot without the husk split, which then needs processing. But we do most of our young trees, 7, 8, 9, 10-year trees, still with nut rolls, as you can see on the left-hand side there. Last year, we've moved on because we harvest in a couple of other places in the country, in Kent and Dorset, to existing orchards which have much heavier crops than our young orchard. And we now have for want of a better word, a giant vacuum cleaner. This is an Italian chestnut walnut harvester, runs off a PTO machine. So we shake onto tarpaulins, roll into line, and then suck them all up, and it sorts them into bags. So we get bags of nuts and piles of husk at the side. We then take all these bags back and we put them in a big washer. We've got a Turkish walnut washer, which also dehusks. And at that point, with a washed and clean walnut in shell, you're at the point where, if you're lucky, you can sell wet walnuts. A lot of the French market is for wet walnuts. We've seemed to have lost most of that market over here. We do have customers who come and take wet walnuts, but most of ours are dried. The issue for most people harvesting walnuts is not so much harvesting them as harvesting them in time. So within 24, 48 hours max on the ground. And then if you can't sell them wet, you've got to dry them. You want to click on one, please, Harriet? Okay, so you can see our walnut washer there, as well as a walnut and a husk. And when they've come out the washer, we've just got veg trays there with, I mean, that's just probably a couple of 100 kilos of washed walnuts in there. At that stage, like I say, if you can sell them wet, great. If not, you dry them. Now, we dry them in 2 dryers. We've got a big commercial one we bought from France, but we've also got a homemade one, which works perfectly well. I've got customers and colleagues and friends who dry them on Argos, who dry them in grain stores, who dry them on wire nets in open sheds with the sun on them. At the end of the day, as long as they're picked off the floor and you dry them sufficiently in a good period of time and they're clean, they will last for a year. So you've got a really nice product that actually we've found, as soon as we put a sign up on the nearest main road, people want English walnuts. There is a big market for, and they want them as soon as they can get them. You click on again, please, Harriet. So on the left, you can see we've got a box dry, which is basically 2x4 and 4mm marine ply. We buy those big yellow vented crates. We built the frame around those so we can put 18 of those in that homemade dryer. And we put a big 60 centimetre hay fan on it and a little bit of propane heater as well, if it's required with the humidity in the air or it's a really damp, wet autumn. And we can dry 200 or 300 kilos in there, which for most people is more than adequate. In the centre is the big commercial dryer we've got. I say big, this is only a 2-stage dryer. Most of the commercial dryers around the world, the commercial walnut growers will be growing agroforestry anywhere between 500 and 5,000 trees, and we'll probably have about a dozen of those in a row. For us, this suffices for what we are at the moment. We've got about 1,000 trees in the ground now, so at some point it won't be enough for us, but it encompasses everything we need at the moment, with a young orchard and harvesting elsewhere, and then gives us the opportunity to then store those nuts. We store them in IBCs, seal the IBCs so the vermin can't get in, and then we've got a product we can sell all year round. Can you click on again, please, Harriet? I've just done some, I've got some quick benefits and costings. The main one for nut agroforestry is you get 2 crops from 1 bit of land, the same as with all other agroforestry, but you're going to get a crop within 2 to 3 years with walnuts. And we reckon currently with costings that you're going to have paid for your agroforestry setup within 6 to 8 years, probably about 7 years. At 15 years, the average walnut tree cultivar we're talking about will probably crop 20 to 40 kilos each tree, and you can sell those dried walnuts between 10 and 20 pound a kilo, depending on where you are and what market you're looking for. Like I say, demand's really very strong. We try to sell everything at the farm gate, as it were, and then you've got all your other benefits of agroforestry. The biggest one we've found in the last few years with the climate has been the shade aspect. We let most of our hedgerows grow tall, but the extra shade from the walnut trees is something that sheep seem to actually seek out. Cost wise, at the moment, bare rooted trees and guards work out somewhere between 35 and 40 pound a place, and I'd say that will be paid within probably about 7 years. We put irrigation on, and you will need irrigation to properly establish, but it's a real low volume irrigation runoff. We use off a cattle livestock trough. Costs about £2.50 a tree, and we supply the trees with a couple of litres, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 litres, depending on the heat, just to get them to survive. With the product we have now, we also do walnut oil, which involves a whole other level of processing, cracking, shelling, and then pressing for oil. But there is a massive market for that, but it's quite a labour intensive and machine intensive system to get through. So pound for pound, it's much better to sell the walnuts as they are. Marketing wise, there is a market for pickled, or walnuts for pickling and walnuts for Nicino for nut wine. And we do have customers who come and pick them off the tree in July, which is obviously the maximum profit, because you don't have to do anything to them, and you're selling them mostly water and husk at that point, because the shell hasn't formed. The next most profitable is definitely wet walnuts when they come off the tree. You just wash them and sell them. Then it's whole shell dried walnuts, and after that you've got all the other ancillary products that you can get. We also grind up the shells and sell those. If people want them, we sell the husks to people who use them for dyeing. So there's a whole gamut of different systems to maximize your profit. And once the trees are established, you have very, very little maintenance. At 7 or 8 years, the trees are self-standing. It's really just protection of the bark. And at that point, you're in basically free profit, because there's a couple of minutes maintenance a tree a year of that. Anything to add? We do sell on the internet. It's probably not as efficient as selling to the farm gate. I would always recommend, and I do recommend when I run walnut courses, that you explore your local market, because it is far and away the best thing to sell everything out of the farm gate if you possibly can. And the market is there. It's just waiting to be exploited, as it were. And that's me done.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Perfectly on time, Tom. Laura, if you're still there, if anybody has any questions for Tom, I personally noted down a couple. Feel free to jot them in the chat, but we'll also have the Q&A at the end. Laura, you're right if I hand over to you. And Tom, I'm assuming his favourite tree is a walnut tree, but if you want to start with your favourite, it was kind of implied by the presentation.
Actually, a heartnut.
Oh, okay. We'll get back to why at the end.
A Japanese walnut.
We'll take that one, and that's the first for heartnut. If you want to do yours, Laura, and then crack on with your presentation, that'd be great.
Yeah, I don't really like trees. No, joking. So yeah, my favourite tree is a coastal redwood, and I like it just for its absolute majestic beauty, the colour of the bark. Great to hug, and equally great to punch, actually, because you can punch the bark and it doesn't hurt either the tree or yourself. Also interesting because it coppices, so it's one of very few conifers that coppice, but. So that's that. So thank you very much for inviting me to participate today. It's really nice to have an opportunity to join forestry with farmers. So really nice to be chatting to you all. My name's Laura Henderson. I'm from English Woodlands Forestry, and we are a consultant mostly working in the southeast of England. I've actually sort of dodged most of my responsibility this evening, because after my first few slides, I'm actually going to pass over to my colleague, Neil Powell. And Neil works for our sister organisation, Powell Forestry, who are mostly responsible for sort of harvesting and marketing. So we'll be more able to talk about the topics you want to hear about today. So just making a start now, just a little bit of background. Hopefully you can see the slides, can you? Yeah, great. So just a little bit of context about our company. We have an umbrella organisation called Land and Forest. On the left here is English Woodlands Forestry, and as I said, we're a consultancy, so we help people with almost any aspect of their treescape on their holdings, from advice about woodland management planning and mapping to obtaining grants, country or others, helping them with the regulatory requirements, organising the management activity in their woodlands, including timber sales, and overseeing tree risk safety, which is a particularly large component of our work. Also, we find increasingly roadside tree safety and farm-related tree safety issues.
Laura,
so we, yeah.
Do you want to just put it into like play mode so it gets a bit bigger? Sorry to cut you off mid-flow. Perfect, thank you.
Is that better? Yeah. So we actually work with numerous different types of estates, from very sort of prestigious large estates down to smaller sort of private woodland owners, farm woodlands, absolutely all sorts. And we cover about, well, in excess of 8,000 hectares of woodland in the southeast. Powell Forestry, who I'll introduce you to, Neil, in just a moment, are much more what I consider to be the toys with the boys. Oh, sorry, the boys with the toys. They are responsible for the actual timber harvesting, extracting and marketing, for selecting the product, for doing any management work. So that might be rhododendron removal or infrastructure works. And they're also very involved at the moment with statutory plant health work. So that's particularly associated with, in the southeast, Ips typographus, that's the spruce bark beetle, and some Phytophthora. So, and also, as I mentioned, traffic management and road closure. And Powell have been over 1,000 tons of timber. So yeah, so that's the experience. We bring those together to be able to offer our clients a really holistic service in their woodland management, both from a consultancy and then a practical opportunity. So just a bit of, I'm trying to tell anybody in this virtual room the benefits of trees and woodlands on farms, but these are some of the things that we are constantly reminding our clients and trying to exploit to best effect. Obviously, there's all the talk about natural capital, flood mitigation, carbon capture, all of the things we know and love about trees. Lots of recreational opportunity, obviously, around either whether it's the shoot or whether it's associated with things like glamping or other enterprises. Timber revenue, which Neil will come on to. The capital value of land is quite an interesting one. We're quite struck by how few people seem to concentrate on that in terms of actual capital value, and in the particularly the capital value of small is absolutely off the scale. So looking after those woodlands and managing them well is like managing any other asset that you own, and can really enhance it. So worth talking to land asset valuers, which is not something that we cover. Livestock welfare. Integrating trees into farm systems. There are lots of models. Obviously, Tom's just spoken about one, but how you can actually integrate the trees into an agroforestry and retention. Certainly in France and in other places, they do a lot more coppice management of their hedgerows, and will use techniques like putting the chip back over the soil for soil improvement, etc. So really thinking about the sort of woody asset on your farm is something that we would really encourage. Challenges, as I've already said, tree risk and safety. Infrastructure is a really big one. Neil will come on to it, and you can see the picture on the top right, what have you, that getting to these blocks of trees, if you're going to harvest them, can be challenging. And can be expensive, but as I said, is an asset. So if you put your money up the front, you really are unlocking much more potential as you go forward. And we'd always encourage farmers to think about that infrastructure across their whole farm to benefit any other operations that you may be doing. Tree health will come on to. Regulations, I'm sure I don't need to talk to farmers about that, but obviously associated with felling licenses and times of operations, European protected species and other sort of limitations of that sort. And then the timing and scale of operations will always suffer limitations associated with the weather or the market or other drivers. So just very briefly, this is just really bullet point stuff, but getting started when you're thinking about harvesting or managing your trees in your woodland. If you've got any scale of woodland on your farm, so if you've got small clumps of woodland, or you've got pockets of woodland that amount to a significant hectareage, we would always recommend you start with a woodland management plan. It really does give you a sort of an aspirational plan for what you're going to do, and it enables you to think about how you're going to manage, how you can capitalise on economies of scale, and you can think about the risks and threats and make it more economical. Felling licenses will be required for most timber felling, unless it's really very, very small scale or small diameter. Countryside stewardship grants are available for woodlands. Our experience indicates that if you've got less than about 20 hectares in total across your holding, the costs of administrating and managing those grants are probably not worth it. That's a generalisation, but I'm sure you're all aware, if you use any sort of countryside stewardship grants, that the admin.
We lost you for a second there, Laura.
Can be pretty onerous, and sometimes actually distracting. Pardon?
We lost you for a second.
Sorry.
We lost your voice for a second. I wonder if it's worth turning off your video and see if that might help.
Okay. I'll just have to leave the slides like that for now. I'll address it in a second, sorry. Yeah, so statutory plant health notices relate to diseases, obviously, and they may, if you get a notifiable disease that is identified by the Forestry Commission on your land, you will be obliged to fell the trees. And then also, we always recommend that people think about budgeting and infrastructure. These are really important things up front. Working out a good budget, as I said, can really help you to formulate a plan that takes into economies of scale and thinks about the sort of future revenue that you could get from your woodlands going forward. So I'm going to pass over to Neil now, who's going to finish the rest of the presentation much more around the sort of marketing and processing side of things. But I think he's just going to start off a little bit with some information around tree health.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Hi, and good evening, everybody. Yeah, what I'll do actually, Laura, if I share my screen, I think I can then control my slides.
Sure.
If I can do the technology.
Don't forget to introduce yourself with your favourite tree, Neil, as well. That's
Right,
important.
That's the important bit, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say my favourite tree, a Douglas fir. As a forester, it's a good commercial all-round tree. Hasn't got these diseases yet, so it's valuable from the minute you plant it to the minute you fell it. Even if you leave it to be an old mature tree, it's still got fantastic timber. So it's the commercial go-to tree, a sort of Ford Cortina tree, should we say? But we love it because it does everything it says on the tin. Not flash, just reliable. Unlike a Ford Cortina, actually. Bad analogy. So just picking up from what Laura said, I'm starting really with, we've got threats on here. The biggest problem we're getting at the moment is tree diseases. They are currently driving forestry. We're doing a lot of work with farmers at the moment because of ash dieback. In the southeast of England, we've got the new threat of the European spruce beetle, which is the government or the Forest Commissioner slapping compulsory or statutory plant health notices on landowners, which is causing a lot of shock in the system. You're an owner of a spruce woodland, you may not even know you've got it, and suddenly it's got a beetle and a statutory plant health notice and 3 months to fell it. And you start off thinking you've got a £150,000 bill and no one to help you. So they're quite scary at the moment, and really a lot of our work has been diverted to sorting out these problems. So just to touch on those problems, most people have ash on their land. Number of issues with ash dieback. There's a risk to life. And there's a perceived risk to life. If you've got footpaths or roads and you own ash, you are responsible for ensuring that ash doesn't fall over and kill someone, because you're deemed to know that it's danger to life. So we've got a lot of people asking us to clear their ash preemptively, and now the councils are writing to landowners telling them to clear their ash off their roadside trees because it's their problem. If you don't deal with it, the council will. So there's that side of things. because they're dying, they're dangerous to fell. Our company's had one quite nasty accident with ash. One of our operators nearly lost his arm because of it. So we mechanically fell a lot of ash because it's safer. But machines are expensive, so again, it's something you'll be careful of because it could cost a lot of money. What we try and do is get a return on the ash. The fired market's very strong at the moment. I'll come on to markets, but certainly if you're organised and you address these issues up front, a lot of it can be done as a productive operation. And a lot of our work is working with farmland with pockets of forest where we're going in and removing the ash, getting the grants that are needed, doing it in a commercial manner. And one thing I put there is diminishing returns. If you don't address your ash, and you see the picture on the left-hand side there, you can see how rotten the ash is. It gets to a point where it's too dangerous to fell and it's commercially not valuable. So you've got to really start acting if you've got ash on your land, because 5 years' time, you'll probably find it's very, very dangerous to fell and it has no value to market. So it's very much a topic which we are devoting a lot of our resource to. Our business has changed now. We're probably selling 50% of our business is now selling firewood from this type of operation, whereas 3 years ago we were doing 75% conifer. So it's a massive swing at the moment. IPS topographer is a new one, probably 2 years into this now. This is where the Forest Commission are flying over land, particularly in the southeast of England. They're covering the whole country, but what they're trying to do is stop this beetle coming from Europe. If it gets into our crops, it'll devastate the whole forestry industry. It attacks only Norway spruce. Scotland and Wales predominantly grow Norway spruce. There's less in the southeast. So what the Forest Commission are trying to do is eradicate the beetle from our Norway spruce to protect the wider forestry industry. Statutory plants health notice are served. You've got probably till March the following year to get your trees down, the ground mulched, and signed off. There's big fines and imprisonment if you read the notices if it's not done. So a bit of a scary one there, but certainly again, having woodlands in management certainly helps because you can get these things resolved quite quickly. Again, we're doing probably now 40% of our business is dealing with ash. It's photographer, and we work closely with English Woodlands to make sure that the owners get all the grants and the permissions in place prior to our felling, because it's got to be done under their close supervision. Any forestry work you do, you've got to have decent extraction points, loading bays, access to the land, and this we're finding is a problem, particularly on farms, isolated woodlands in fields. When do you get to them? We don't want to damage the crops, the soils, etc. It's something that has to be addressed. A typical loading bay can cost £20,000 to install. It's a lot of outlay. Again, there are some grants available. If the operation is large enough, there's a return. What we tend to say to landowners, though, that these loading bays are an investment. Once they're in place, if they're built properly, they can service the woodland ad infinitum. So it's an upfront cost. Build it right, build it well, be clever about how it's built, and the infrastructure will serve you over a number of years. And if you've got a rotational crop, obviously it'll continue to bring in a yield. So it's an upfront cost, but planned well, done sensibly, that cost is then spread over a lot of operations, not just forestry. It can be used for other situations. Moving on. So current market conditions, we've got currently, forestry's in a bit of recession. Our softwood market has crashed. The demand for softwood is rock bottom. No one's buying timber products made from the UK's timber. Hardwood is strong since the Ukraine war. Everyone's switched to buying English hardwood, English firewood. They used to import a lot from the Balkans and Russia. That now has dried up. The price of gas and oil going up. People have switched to buying log burners. So there's a very strong market in hardwood, which is good because that's coinciding with the ash. Not so good for the IPS, which is Norway spruce, because the demand for Norway spruce is dropping catastrophically. We had a big storm a couple of years ago, Storm Arwen, and 4 million cubic metres of timber was blown over in Scotland. That's still working its way into the market. So it's causing a lot of factors causing a problem with softwood. Just to give you an idea, I've sort of mapped some price changes over the last sort of 18 months or so, 12, 18 months. You can see softwood has plummeted down by 50%. There's other markets like shaver bar, which goes to horse bedding or animal bedding, is strong, and that's driven by the lack of log because people aren't felling softwood. Then the secondary products of softwood is becoming more demand for that material. As you can see, hardwood going up 22%. That's probably a bit historic now. Sorry, 36%. That's probably historic now. It's probably gone up near 40%. So we have a very small industry in forestry in the UK, and the prices can vary very rapidly, month on month, year on year. So again, having your woodlands in management, having people on board, consultants and contractors, they can advise when these markets are dipping and changing. But it's all these things got to be brought together to make an operation successful. So let's go next slide. Hardwood, as talked about, I say most hardwood is suitable for firewood. There is a chip market for hardwood for lesser quality. If you've got chestnut on your land, there's chestnut coppice, which is again quite a valuable product to have. Quality timber, unless you've got a very well managed woodland or you picked up something historically that was looked after in the past, you won't get much quality timber. But if you have got nice oak on your land, it can be worth a staggering amount of money at the moment. Oak, British hardwoods are very, very valuable. But as I say, very rare to find a woodland that someone doesn't already know has got good hardwood on it. So if you've got it, you probably know about it. If you do stumble across it, you'll be very pleased. We do whole tree chipping as well, recover brash. That's a consideration you need to do, and it's subject to each operation, each site needs, and the fluctuation of the markets. Softwood production in the doldrums at the moment, it will pick up, but we're probably thinking 9 months before that becomes a reality again. We've got the IPS, which is driving that. But certainly softwood, it's a lovely material. You can rotate your crops, putting out a crop every 7 years. So the industry's fed off softwood really because it's the fast growing, high production element of the industry. A lot of products made with softwood, huge demand for it normally, and they're a wonderful crop to have in your woodlands. In terms of costs for production and working, we've done a bit of work recently, Laura and I, and we've sort of put a sliding scale there of how different circumstances affect the cost of production. So clearly a nice flat, well draining, sandy woodland is easy to operate in. If you start going to steep ground, difficult terrain, different soil types, you can see the costs increasing there. Long extraction routes, because you've got to put a loading bay a long way away to the road, again that costs money. If you've got power lines, underground pipes, etc., again there's a cost there. So you've got to look at your what you've got, and then look at the infrastructure need, look at the material you've got, the timber you've got there, and the costs then work themselves out. You need, the more you have in terms of volume, then obviously the operation, the economies of scale kick in really quickly. So if you are looking at doing your woodlands and you've got fields and with small pockets of woodland, it's probably worth considering them as a project rather than looking at ones and twos. Link the timber together and maximise your market. And I think that's me done.
Sorry, I lost the head room for a second. Thank you very much, Neil. So we've got one final speaker, which is Jez, and then we'll get to the Q&A session. But yeah, if you have any questions for Neil, if you put them in the chat, it would be brilliant. So yeah, if you're happy to stop sharing, Neil, and we will hand over to Jez. Jez, don't forget, what's your favourite tree and why? That's critical introduction.
Harriet, I've made a special slide of my favourite tree whilst I've been waiting, just for you. Is that good?
Perfect. Yep.
Excellent. Evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. I know some of you know me, most of you don't. I had a beautiful picture of agroforestry, but as Harriet's made us tell you about our favourite tree, this is the swamp cypress outside Dartington Hall. And as Neil's nicked Douglas fir already, this swamp cypress is incredibly interesting as a future species to grow in UK forestry. We think it'll grow incredibly well. This particular swamp cypress has grown incredibly well in Dartington Hall. But as an individual tree, I like it because the asymmetry of its placement inside the quad at Dartington, I find quite exciting, and it resonates with what we do at Evolving Forests. And I have a small business, Evolving Forests, and it has evolved out of doing product development and supply chain work for the forestry and timber industries. So generally what we get involved with is the stuff that perhaps is on the fringe and the edge, and especially this rather grey world between growing trees and using timber. And a lot of that is traditional forestry based, but a lot of it is involved in agroforestry and urban forestry. And that's what I want to concentrate on this evening. I mean, from our point of view as people working within timber supply chain, we don't really see much of a difference between whether trees are growing in a field or on a street or in a traditional high forest. And so I want to present some case studies of work that we've been involved with, and then look at some lessons that we could bring to agroforestry from that. And I'm going to concentrate generally on the trees that are there now, rather than the trees that might be there in the future, because there's an awful lot of them. And there's an awful lot of what we traditionally think of as rubbish out there in hedges, in wood pasture, but also there's a lot of stuff going in silvo-arable systems that are open grown trees as well. So we're going to focus on open grown trees and from an urban context, because, well, you'll see why as we go on. And these trees on the left here are in Zone 1. They're in Elephant Park in London, or at least they were. It was a large development site. It's essentially, if I hadn't told you it was in Zone 1, if you can't see a block of flats in the background, it could very well be an orchard or a wood pasture. And these trees were coming down, and the client, the developer, wanted to do something interesting with them. And this was the start of quite a journey for us, because to look at these trees from a traditional timber merchant perspective, they're absolute garbage. No one really wanted to do anything with these. The interesting thing was, though, that we went and we did a volume analysis. We took a couple of them away. We sorted them up. We found they contained some quite exceptional timber, much to our surprise. We had to revise up our volume estimates of what we were going to get out of these. And the main stems we had taken away, sawn, kiln dried in a very traditional way. And then that timber ended up back in the development that these trees, the site that these trees came from. So the table and chairs above came out of London Plain off the site, and virtually everything except the lights that you can see in this photo came out of timber that came off the site. And I think this very first job proved a point that you can take timber off open grown trees, whether they be on the street or in a hedgerow or in a wood pasture. And this has gone on to quite a variety of projects now, as somehow increasingly awful quality timber that we're asked to make the most of. but this is another job, also in London. And what we've done here for the harvesting contractor is divide up the timber that we want out of it. So it's slightly different from taking timber out of conventional forestry, in that often the contractors who are harvesting this aren't used to harvesting for timber, and it's motor manual chainsaw work. And so in this project, I think there are about 45 trees. We photographed every one of them and marked up exactly what we thought was going to be sawlog timber and firewood timber. And so the harvesting contractor and the tree surgeons could take that on site. And we then present them with instructions on how to present and store that timber, which in this case they've largely ignored by just piling it up. But we sort of project manage that whole process. And I think, looking at this photo, one of the criticisms always leveled at this is, but it's kind of easy to take urban timber. You've got a big tarmac road right next to the tree. And whilst it is easy to draw up a lorry to the side of this, the complications of closing a road in central London are pretty dramatic. It's a hugely long-winded process. And certainly what we found is it is much easier to get access to most hedgerows or most silvo-arable systems or most wood pastures, as long as it's dry enough to get a vehicle on there. And this is the outturn to give you some indication of what we're getting out of this. So the 44 trees came out of this in a huge variety of different types, and we'll come back to this a bit later. I can't remember quite what cubic meterage came out of it, but there was just over 500 board meters of timber out of this. And this is certainly for taking timber from overgrown trees, the potential board meters are usually more important than the actual volume getting out of it, because it's generally going to furniture makers or specialist timber users who are more concerned with what length they're going to get rather than what volume they're going to get. And you can see here we've picked a range of suitable plank sizes for the sawmiller to cut, ranging from 15 mil to 27 and 54. And we find these are pretty standardized products that people can work with. And it's for efficiency's sake within the supply chain, it's quite important to have an eye on what you think is going to come out of that, or to find someone that can give you that advice. And then finally, just want to touch on existing small woodland as well, because it's often overlooked. My sort of quite pointed attitude is often that anything under 5 hectares is going to be pretty pointless to manage, because you're not going to get much product out of it. And then last week we were on this site on the left, and this is a 3.5 hectare woodland that is grossly underthinned. It's an old conifer crop that's been, someone must have got a grant to plant and then did very little with it. I think there was a first thinning, then nothing happened. It's incredibly knotty. It's pretty poor quality timber. However, from that 3.5 hectares, which is going to be clear felled because it's so dense, it's probably all going to fall down if we try and thin it, this house is going to be constructed. And we know that because we know that the quality of the timber is suitable for modern engineered timber processes. So this will go into glulam beams eventually, and probably this time next year, it will be forming the structural components of this new house on the site. And so it's made me think about small woodlands and how there's very often a way of getting a very high quality product from what feels like a very poor quality crop. And I'd suggest that if you think going down a timber route maybe for you, and you've got either hedgerow trees or wood pasture, or you're growing silvo-arable systems, you should think about what the potential for timber is going to be, and don't be dissuaded by the fact that it looks like an awful crop, because with modern day technologies and processes, very often it's going to have quite a high market value potentially. And it's often very easy to get at as well. And then finally, just to look at some other novel species and things that we're looking at into the future, and one of those is eucalyptus, and pretty much any other type of wood coming out of small woodlands that's generally been growing for biomass, which always seems slightly ridiculous when you can go into a pharmacy and look how much you pay for 15 mil of eucalyptus essential oil. And so we're now working with Sheffield University to look at how we can potentially move into that biodistilled product range from these crops that were grown for very low value wood chip. And so where does that leave us really? First of all, I'd say don't be dissuaded from timber, even if what you think you've got is rubbish. It very often isn't as rubbish as you think. But also learn what you're going into. Growing trees is a complicated business, the same as any other agricultural crop. You can't just stick them in the ground and let them grow on. This is a sweet chestnut crop in France. It's about a hectare woodland, and it will produce very fine timber because they're pruning it at a very early stage. Now, admittedly, this is in France, but if we sort of take our minds away from the great squirrel, then there is potential to grow very high quality timber. But you need to know the properties as well. It's no good thinking that you're going to sell timber to someone producing outdoor furniture when it's not a durable timber. It's no good thinking you're going to sell to furniture makers when what you've got isn't a timber that's demanded by them. And very often it's a case of not you needing to know that, but needing to know when you need to get a specialist in to help you market that timber, or even just give you a rough indication on whether it's worth valuing it or not, or whether it is actually just a firewood crop. And then you need a program of management, however old the timber is. Does it need pruning? How large are you going to let it grow? Sometimes oversized timber that might have some of the best timber in the world in it, very large trees, sawmills just won't be able to take because they're too big, while smaller trees that might not look so good are actually more valuable because they can be got to a mill. Then there's the whole business of access that everyone's brought up before. In our experience, access other than very steep Devon woodlands is never as bad as you think it's going to be, especially on very small woodlands, field edges, hedges, silvopasture systems. If you can get a tractor to it, absolutely great. If you can get a tractor near it to be able to get a winch near it, then that'll do as well. And then there's knowledge of how to sell and present timber. And I'd strongly suggest that this is a small diversification of your farm enterprise, then at that point of selling the trees, whether you sell them standing, whether they're sold at roadside, whether they go straight to a mill or a furniture maker, all of these kind of things, whether they're sold locally, national supply chains, is probably the point where you're best off getting someone in to help you, especially for that first time you do it. Once you've got a small supply chain with, say, a local sawmill or a local group of furniture makers established, you can probably sell direct to them. But making those first steps and making sure you get the right value for the timber from your trees, it's probably important to get someone that knows the local supply chains to work through that with you. And then finally, it's all very well having a market. It's all very well having the trees on the site. But the worst thing, which seems like a tiny thing, but gets the timber every time, is bad presentation of timber. And if the timber's sitting in the mud for ages, if it's getting pulled through gravel, if it's not presented well, if a potential buyer can't see it, or it doesn't look nice, they're not going to buy it. And I think I'll just leave it there with these 3 examples of timber products that have come from open grown trees. One's interior refectory tables for a cafe that came off an agroforestry system. The centre one is sweet chestnut that came from London for outdoor furniture. It's a good durable timber, lent itself to outdoor furniture. And the second is the one on the left is almost very boring interior cladding that's been painted over, and that is a variety of species, mainly sycamores and maples, but is actually fairly poor quality timber, but with a dash of paint has been made into an artwork. And these are all commercial projects with buyers taken out of open grown trees. And I'll leave it at that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jez. I know you have to leave at 8:30, so if anyone has any questions for Jez, you want to get them in earlier or nowish, so feel free to raise a hand. You don't have to put them in the chat now that we've finished presenting. There were a couple of questions I've seen Tom has been on. The first and possibly most obvious one is, how do we get timber or any tree crops away with grey squirrels kicking around? Tom is thoroughly on it from the looks of it in terms of trapping and shooting. Any tips from our other speakers on grey squirrel management that you'd add to Tom's approach?
Stand by every nice tree with a shotgun.
Right.
24/7. There are people growing exceptional oak in small woodlands in the UK, in Devon, but they devote an awful lot of time to squirrels. But they're pretty not knowledgeable people whose experience I sort of take and as people who know what they're doing, and they think it's going to pay to do that.
Tom, Laura, Neil?
Yeah, just come in a second what Jez has said. Oh, sorry, Neil. We've also been given anecdotal sort of advice. A couple of things. One is that the good nature traps that exist are actually not proving to be as good as people had hoped. These are the ones that have a gas canister that are baited, and the squirrel goes up and gets a bolt in the head. They seem to be getting a bit of bycatch, and they're also quite labour intensive. So some people are saying they're not the silver bullet. Sorry for the pun. But that actually setting up squirrel bait stations and sitting there with a gun, and there are a lot of hobbyist people who are really happy to spend a bit of time doing that, and it can be incredibly effective. So really sort of seconding Jez's point that you just need to sit there with a gun.
I think I was going to say that the tree selection, you're going to have diversity, and some trees squirrels like less than others. Unless you get your deer pressure down and your squirrel pressure down, you can't plant too many trees that they love to eat. So you've got to kind of think very carefully about what you do plant, particularly for the moment. If you want to get crops away, make sure they're resilient to everything that's threatening them. Otherwise, you have to do all the mitigations. If you do the mitigations, do them well.
Tom, did you have anything to add, or are you happy?
No, for us, we don't see squirrel damage on the trees. Luckily, we've never had any kind of squirrel damage, but obviously they're after the crop. And we're working on the principle that these contraceptive programs in 10 years' time will make the massive difference. But at the moment, we have fen traps all over the place, and we shoot and we trap, and at this time of year we're starting to put out cage traps, baited cage traps, and it's a combination, and we in the winter we'll have a go at the drays and everything else, and they're aware we're there, They're very, very wary. So we reduce our losses substantially for the nut crop because they're shy as hell because they know we're there. But if you're going to plant walnut trees and you're not going to trap and shoot and everything else that everyone's talked about, then it's a waste of time. There's no point.
Possibly another predictable question, maybe. As a question of the native versus non-native in terms of what we should be emphasising to plant for future woodland. And then also a kind of, I'm going to throw this query in at the same time, the question about like how much should we be paying attention to current markets and how much should we be looking at the future? And I think probably this works not just for timber, but for tree crops as well, because you've got 1,000 walnuts in, Tom. We've put in 2,000. I've heard of a few other people, you know, putting them in for the future. Are we going to be overrun with walnuts in a few years' time? But I'm going to throw it to Jez first because we're going to lose you in 4 minutes, and then we'll work around.
Oh God, I think I need an hour to answer that. Okay, but for me, I'm not convinced that the word native holds much water these days, and in the future, I just don't understand enough about climate models to know whether 1.5 degrees or 3 degrees or 5 degrees or minus 10 degrees is what's going to happen. And if trees freely regenerate in the UK, however they've got here initially, to me that's sort of native. That's fine for me, but I think actually it's about complexity and landscape and forestry complexity, and the native non-native debate's been pushed around monocultures really, and that's different from native and non-native, and it's actually about complex silvicultural systems that spread out of the forest and into the landscape through hedgerows and back into the forest through small coops of different species, different light conditions, promoting better soil health, irrespective of species, I think is what's important. And having that treescape approach and whole farm plans to those trees and the complexity of different types of trees that's important.
I'll take that answer and say thank you very much for your contribution this evening, Jez.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Got to rush off. Sorry to leave you. Bye.
I don't know if anyone else wants to pick up on that point and go from there.
I think Jez's comment was. Sorry, go on, Laura.
Go for it now. No, go for it. Your turn first.
No, I was going to say, Jez's comments very, very prudent. I think a lot of the stuff we're doing is we're starting to move to natural regeneration, getting woodland designs better, thinking about bionet gain, and the holistic approach. So, getting too hung up about what trees to plant, you need to look at the wood you have, the soils you have, what you're trying to create, whether you want to have producing a crop or amenity woodland. You've got to decide what that woodland's purpose is, look at the wider picture of what you can do with that woodland. And a lot of these things can coexist if you're very, very clever, intelligent, thoughtful, and manage your woodlands properly, and also manage the work that's done in your woodlands properly, so that the thinning regimes, that was some of the thinning regimes we're doing now, some blocks marking all the trees, we're not going down cut to select routes. We are tackling diseases, and we're using the diseases that we're tackling to then regenerate a more robust woodland for the future. So I think over to you, Laura. I mean, I think that's where it's going to head.
Yeah, I agree, Neil, and I think it's already headed there. And I think that that policy is readdressing the balance a little bit, in the immediate term. I don't think we should be so hung up on native. I think the ecology of the woodland is incredibly important, and in some cases, certainly monocultures of non-native species can be very depauperate of ecology. But generally, reasonably diverse species diversity and structural diversity are the things that really drive ecology. And we've got to also acknowledge that our ecology will change alongside the climate change. So we've got to adapt to all the other things that are going to be mutually dependent on those trees as they go forward. climate model wise, there is a data modelling system developed by Forest Research called the Environmental, you're nodding, Harriet, presumably you know about it, but ESC, Ecological Site Classification, which does, if you've got soil data, it's not a silver bullet, but it's very helpful to put it in for some suggestions of trees, both native and non-native, that will do well on your soils. And soils are absolutely key. We work on a lot of sandy soils where getting native trees established properly is just, you're on a hiding to nothing. So native, non-native, I think we've got to be a little bit more intelligent in that discussion.
And just picking up on the points that you both made, do you think having that diversity of planting will then buffer people for kind of any variability in future timber price?
Future, yeah, who can predict the future? I think the answer is yes. Yeah, I had an interesting one the other day, for example, Western red cedar, which is a monoculture planted a lot 50 years ago, but now suddenly 10 years ago you couldn't get any money for it. It was not a good crop. Now it's in massive demand. It's a lovely cladding timber. It needs no treatment. It's beautiful to look at. So people have written it off. So I think if you plant a tree, and it's quite interesting what Jez was saying, he's finding uses for trees that weren't planted commercially. So I think if a tree's planted, someone will find a use or value for it. But you've got to be, you've still got to put a bit of intelligence into it and think about what you're planting. If you plant something that grows too fast, it's never going to be a quality timber. So it's a balancing act all the time, isn't it? But yeah, there are lots of wrong answers, but you've got to have a go, and you can't predict the future, but you've got to do your best, haven't you?
Starting by having
the
a go at the wrong
critical
answer.
thing. If I could just jump in there, Harry, I think also the critical thing is the care of the woodlands. I mean, we look at the woodlands that were planted under grant following the 1987 storm, particularly in the south, and they're by and large absolutely atrocious, and they're full of birch and arguably native species. But because they've been utterly neglected, they have either no ecological or timber value. So there's a bigger question around the stewardship of the land and the trees that we're talking about planting.
Thank you. And Tom, from a kind of tree crop perspective, predict, like, you know, do we think that we might sort of run a risk of sort of boom and busts if everybody, you know, like you see traditionally, I think with the Christmas tree market, where kind of all of a sudden it seems like a good idea, everybody plants Christmas trees, and then the market gets flooded, and a few years later everybody gets out of Christmas trees, and it kind of happens over and over again. Do you think we run the risk of something like that happening with some of the other kind of tree crops coming out through agroforestry?
I think with the nut crops, I mean, I don't know I don't know the latest data on how many tens of thousands of kilos of walnuts are imported, for example. If we discount, don't even talk about cob nuts and all the other nuts. We sell all of our nuts within 10 miles, and we're a tiny producer. We're one of the few people trying to do it commercially in the UK, but it's a thing that everyone is aware of. And there is a massive demand, especially with the health benefits of nuts now being, you know, there seems to be a study comes out every week to do with Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and the beneficial effects of nuts and the proteins and everything in nuts. So as a crop, I mean, it's similar to apples and pears, and that we're importing way more than we're producing in the UK, which seems absolutely crackers, because we've got one of the best climates in the world. And walnuts, we're kind of not quite in the Goldilocks zone, but our climate's becoming more and more the perfect climate. You see Southern Europe, California, all these, Australia, they're having to massively irrigate their nut orchards to get a crop. Now, this year, certainly we don't have to irrigate at all because it's so damn wet, but we're kind of in an area, this Northern European climate gives us that crop that there is a market for without much intervention, which has got to be the main thing. We're not having to put extra fertilizers, extra water and everything else in to get a crop that people want. So I would say we could probably be growing 100,000 acres of walnuts in the UK, and there would still be a market for them because there's just such a demand for that product. And we're not even scratching the surface. In the UK, walnuts are still for Christmas for a lot of people, you know, whereas our customers round by us now, we've got people who come back week on week who eat walnuts every year, which most other cultures do. Whereas, we traditionally eat bananas and avocados and everything else, haven't we? Which doesn't make much sense for the climate going forward.
Well, that's a comforting thought, and good for people who sell walnut trees, I imagine, Tom.
Yeah, that's not our main game. That's a byproduct.
I'm teasing. I'm going to slightly abuse my position as chair and ask you another follow-up question, Tom, because in your presentation you sort of looked at a lot of the harvesting and processing machinery, but obviously kind of when you got into walnuts and sort of your sort of agroforestry walnut system, that wasn't necessarily common knowledge. So I just think, do you have any advice for people kind of when they start to kind of investigate what machinery might be best suited for their system, particularly if maybe their system is less conventional than kind of most productive orchards, about where is a good place to go kind of hunting to figure out what the best kind of kit is for them?
Yeah, but like most tree crops, I would say to get started with walnuts and take a crop, same with all fruit, there is very little kit that you need. It's only when you come to the harvesting, if you've got large volumes, that you need to be investing money. We've got customers and acquaintances and stuff who've put in, I don't know, 50 trees, and they do everything by hand. They harvest by hand, they dry by hand, and they sell all their crop with almost no machinery at all. There is no knowledge base in the UK. In fact, most of Northern Europe, the Dutch are in the same position as us. They've got no real big nut association organisation. So we're all kind of learning from each other. We speak to a couple of the French guys, one of the French manufacturers of walnut machinery and stuff, but we've kind of gone down the line of, we want to process the nuts to get the oils. So most of our machinery, apart from the dryer, is that extra step to add value.
You just muted yourself accidentally, I think.
No, it went into sleep mode. Didn't touch the mouse for a while. There is no need for a small scale producer to have very little machinery at all in the first 10 years. At 15, 20 years, you're going to need to be harvesting machinery if you're looking at, a couple of 100, 300 or 400 trees. But even that's doable on a small scale and for a small budget. If you're putting 1,000 trees or 2,000 as you've got, then the harvesting of those at 10, 15 years is going to need mechanization. But a small self-propelled walnut brush harvester is about 20,000 euros. So in terms of farm kit, it's right at the bottom end. People are going to spend way more on a sprayer or a drill or something like that. And if you're selling even at £10 a kilo, you're getting 400 quid off a tree at 10, 12 years maybe. So those economies of scale go up very quickly for something like a tree crop. The advice is find somebody who's already doing it, or find somebody who's tried it. We always talk to people. People phone us up all the time, and we'll have a chat with people. There are other people out there doing these kind of things, not necessarily with walnuts, but with tree fruit. And it's the same with any timber crop, whether you're taking the fruit or the nut. It's the establishment for us is the most critical thing. The first 10 years of a walnut tree will dictate the next 30 years crop. So the most important thing is you plan what you're going to do before you do it. Think carefully about where you're putting your trees and how you're going to look after them and establish them in the first 5, 6, 7 years, and that will pay dividends for the next 40.
Thanks, Tom. Neil, I imagine you're busily answering Mark's question about whether there is a kind of untapped reserve of possibly good trees and sort of from post 87 onwards in neglected farm woodlands. Is the resource there, and what's the best way of getting them out, and is it something where kind of farmers can club together in a kind of cluster system to get the best value from them? But would you mind saying it as well as typing it?
Yes, yeah, of course, yeah. No, it's an interesting point, we did a roadside work with a farm cluster recently, which was very, very efficient. 4 farmers brought together along a road edge. We got the grants combined, the planning licenses combined, the scheme combined to do it, and of course the mobilisation was spread amongst all 4 farmers, and we counted back all the trees from various people's land and got them as much money back. On the crops themselves, again, yes, you can share access. Again, the mobilisation costs, if you bring in a harvester to site, you can reduce those costs down, combine the compartments. Also, I think it's better for the environment as well, because if you look at the several woodlands across a whole environment, clearly by doing the woodland management together will benefit everything. So certainly cluster together is a brilliant way of looking at your woodlands.
Neil, now that you can apply to the English Woodland Creation Offer with across multiple SBI numbers as a way of kind of starting up your woodland, do you think it's worth farm clusters kind of clubbing together to look at making that application to establish woodland, and then looking at putting in that kind of infrastructure that you all talked about being worth considering at the beginning, like the kind of access tracks and storage sites, and to kind of collaborate from the offset?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Yeah, I mean the four farms we worked on, there were a couple of sites you could never have accessed without having the cooperation of your neighbour. You know, they ran along each other. We used the machine access where we park things, where we put timber. It was, without them joined together, it would have cost them probably as much again to do the work. But the cooperation, the holistic nature of the job we ended up with, we gave them a really good solution, I feel, for that. And yeah, if it's got to make sense, particularly if you've got scattered woodlands all around, which possibly were planted as one in the first place, and land has been broken up. So bringing that together to me makes sense. And go on, Laura, you're going to tell me off now, aren't you?
No, not at all. I think it makes absolute sense. My only sort of caveat to it is that not all of the grants enable collaborative claiming and applications. So you just need to be a little bit careful. I don't think the infrastructure grant allows it, but don't 100% take my word for that. It may have changed, but UCO definitely does. The tree health pilot definitely does, and that's the one that we used on the farm cluster for the roadside works. But yeah, just a word of warning, not all of them do, but definitely to reiterate Neil's point that collaborating in terms of your land use, your product, getting together to hubs of potentially selling firewood, all of that sort of thing. There's a bit of a dearth of it, and I think we could do loads more.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got distracted by the chat then as well. Clive, I notice you are on and commenting a little bit, and I know you're not officially a speaker this evening, but if you wanted to unmute and come in and sort of share any thoughts that you had, you'd be very welcome to. I'm really sorry, my dog is whining fabulously in the background. Yeah, hello, evening, Clive. Any thoughts that you'd like to add, or kind of reflections on top of this evening's presentation?
Well, just to thank the 3 speakers that are still with us. It's been a great evening. Yeah, I'm itching to post in the chat a short report that we'll be launching at the agroforestry show on exactly this topic of, I guess, the kind of wider viability and the case for farm scale forestry. I can't do that because we're going to officially launch it at the show, but I would encourage as many of you to come along to that session as possible. In it, we profile a few examples, but really we get into some of the discussion that I think we've been having tonight. So maybe just to make a couple of sort of observations, really. Laura put up on one of her slides earlier the kind of wider benefits of small woodlands, farm woodlands, and I know a lot of the chat and the sort of conversation is inevitably focused around timber, and that, very, very massively supportive of that. But we've got to, I think, view the viability of these woodlands in a sort of broader sense, in terms of their sort of wider contribution to the farming system and to public benefits as well. So I think that's an important point to make. Just on I guess kind of another theme that we've been sort of, all the speakers have been boxing around is this slippery term of quality, because really that just depends on a particular market at a particular moment, and as I think some of Jez's examples demonstrated, it is possible to market what is perceived to be very low grade, poor quality timber. So, you know, we've got a particular infrastructure in the UK now, where we've kind of really lost a lot of our ability to make use of more diverse species and kind of more diverse sizes of timber at any scale anyway. There's obviously artisan and sort of niche markets, and I think that's another sort of theme that we explore in the report. There's, you know, again, I'm as supportive as anyone else about our obsession and passion for tree planting, but we need to sort of generate a bit more of a culture of tree growing in the UK, I think. And you know, we've lost a lot of our ability to you know, win the value from these small woodlands, and we've got to kind of rebuild that, I think. And some of the examples that we've heard tonight are fantastic on that. The other great thing about timber is, and you know, Neil painted the picture of the volatility of timber markets. That's always been the case, but you know, the beauty about timber is that you don't have to harvest it at those times. You know, those trees carry on growing, and I know we again have this perverse sort of position that we're in the UK, that somehow big trees are a problem. But you know, that's part of what I was saying earlier about rebuilding that infrastructure so that big trees aren't a problem. When I went to forestry school, I was told to grow trees as big as possible. They're basically tapering cylinders, and you can recover a lot more timber the bigger the tree. But we've gone down a particular route on that. So yeah, I'm probably rambling now, but please come along to a session on day one of the agroforestry show. One of the other people on the, I think Ruth's still here, somebody else on the call tonight is one of the case studies, broadleaf Wales, that we profile. Fantastic quality timber being grown in North Wales in that farming system. So yeah, look forward to seeing you there. And you can pick up a hard copy of the report that I'm going on about as well.
Thank you, Clive. If I again might sort of jump in and abuse my privilege to share, I have a couple of questions for all of you, actually. I suppose, so picking up on Clive's point, actually, Tom, you were talked about kind of selling husk, selling shell, so kind of finding markets for the less quality element of what you're producing as well. And I wondered if you had any sort of, how did people approach you? Did you approach them? And then a kind of along a similar theme, I guess, for Neil and Laura, like maybe a lot of farm woodland, you know, or hedges particularly, people don't necessarily consider as being great for timber, but maybe there are other things that kind of markets are developing around, or like, you know, the obvious one being firewood, but maybe the less obvious one being like ramial wood chip to sell to gardeners, or, you know, something like that. Are there any kind of markets developing for the less good stuff that you're aware of? But yeah, Tom, do you want to go first?
Yeah, we've been approached by people. Just the one that springs to mind is a guy who refurbishes old string instruments, and when they take the strings off and clean them all up, where people's fingers have been, it's stained very different from where there's been no fingers, and where the strings have been or the frets have been. And he simply wanted husks as an old-fashioned dye, a walnut dye, to restain these old instruments. And that was, you know, we've got 2 or 3 people come along and ask for that. The one we're exploring at the moment is sandblasting. It seems to be a bit of a niche market, but we do have a lot of shell at the moment. A lot of our shell we burn on our own log burners because it burns at an incredibly high heat, and it's fantastic. But there is a market out there for sandblasting, for using walnut shell, because it's obviously softer than sand and metal substrates. We have people who are interested in the leaves as well, bizarrely. I don't quite know, I presume that's for dye as well. But for us, it's every part of the product we can use, and anything that doesn't get used, once we've shelled and harvested, we mulch, and that goes back on the trees. So that gets mixed with sheep sheep manure out the yards, and with all the walnut, cob nut husk, and any shell goes in that, and then goes back onto the field. So we don't actually waste anything. But we'd like to sell a lot more of that walnut shell if we could. But it's finding it's exploring those markets. For example, the sandblasting, from what we can see, most of the shell that's sold for sandblasting in the UK is imported from China. And it's sold at a ridiculously cheap price that makes it almost impossible for us at the moment to get into that. But it's something we need to explore.
And do you think, like, the guy that's approached you for the instrument repair, do you think that was like because the signs on the side of the road where you also advertise that you sell walnuts? Was it the website? Was it Google? So website.
That was a Google one. Oh, I
Right.
want walnuts. I'll Google walnuts, and we came up and he said, "Have you got walnuts? Have you got shell? When can I get some husks?" And it's kind of like, right, well, come at the end of September, just give us your phone number and we'll give you a ring and you can come and have as much as you like. But we do a lot. There's quite a lot of, native French and Italians living around here, and we do sell walnuts. They come and pick them off the tree and to make walnut wine and things like that. So all of these ancillary products come out of the tree, but we haven't got the volume at the moment to push that marketing side because we sell everything we got. In 5 years' time, we'll certainly be having to a lot more active, and we will be a lot clever about what we do. But one good thing about a tree crop like this is it gradually increases year on year with a nut crop. So we're not having to sell 20 tons in the first 3 years. We're gradually, and with our harvesting outside, we're building it up. So we're building up that experience and then exploring the markets we find as we go, which is probably different from having a timber crop that's ready and you're taking X amount of tons out in one go. We're not in that position, thankfully.
Neil or Laura, I don't know which of you want to.
I was just thinking, one of the things, being a small industry, we're very close to a lot of our customers, people we supply, and it's amazing how much innovation is going on. There are people always looking for estates with large crops that aren't viable at the moment. They are always looking for try and find ways of capitalising on their crops. A lot of these are inherited, they were planted back in the day when someone thought there'd be a market. That market's disappeared. You've got hazel, which people are trying to look to go initially biomass, but people are talking about making substitutes for plastics. There's a whole raft of stuff coming along, and there's a lot of innovation. It's grassroots stuff, but it's coming, and I think there always will be people that will find a use for something, as long as it's sensible.
Yeah, just to add, Harriet, also we have, I mean, the challenge obviously with niche markets is getting enough product or actually making it commercially viable. I mean, everybody knows that. But interestingly, we have exposure to people who want things like just foliage. So they might be dealing in sort of, I guess it's flower arranging and things like that, but they might want strip down sort of first pine thinnings, or sometimes even white beam and things like that. So you can get into that sort of market. It's very niche. On ash, Hurley sticks are still a viable market, and you can get pretty good timber for that and then sell the rest of the product. I mean, there are always complications around these sorts of niche markets, around the amount, the cost, the waste, the access and things, but those sorts of things. We also sell first thinnings of birch for horse jumps. So there's all sorts of things that come out, but they are at a scale where the amount, in terms of the amount of revenue that you make, is obviously very small scale. And that's not to say you shouldn't do it. So I think it's very exciting to do it. We should look for more and more. But those are the challenges associated with those sorts of products.
You do get a lot of phone calls, ship's masts, dugout canoes, log cabins. I had to refurbish the original scout hut built by Baden Powell, and the cutting list was quite bizarre. It's all the stuff that was rotted. So there are niche industries out there, and there are people trying to find new industries. So they'll come, but that is the future, and who knows which ones are going to really get going.
Well, and that seems like possibly a good note to end things on, or maybe an ambiguous note to end things on.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
You're all good. Well, thank you all very much for your time this evening. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you everybody for coming along. So yeah, well, that's the sort of wrap up of this season of webinars. We'll upload the recording onto the Irish Woodland Forum YouTube page, where you can find it. We'll probably put it on the Farm Woodland Forum website as well. If you're not a Farm Woodland Forum member, I believe it's obligatory for me to push you to become one. But lots of insightful chat and a just amazing group email to throw random questions at, which always elicits lots of good responses. And I think Clive has already plugged in the chat, but just a reminder that the agroforestry show is on the 6th and the 7th of September at Helen Browning's farm in Wiltshire. So yeah, if you kind of really want to sort of see people in person and not on screen and ask questions and go to lots of really interesting and varied discussions, then would really recommend that you check that out. But yeah, thank you all very much for taking part, and hopefully see you another time.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for going.
Stop recording. Yay. Oh no. Yes.